Well, good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Jim, thank you for that introduction. Neil, thank you to you and the Institute of Politics for hosting me today. Larry, thank you for inviting me. And Ray Buckley, thank you for doing the amazing job that you are doing under very trying circumstances. When I was deciding whether to run for president, something I had never thought of in my life until I was thinking about it this year, I consulted my three daughters. Susan and I are raising three girls who are now 20, 19, and 15. And the 15-year-old was incredibly enthusiastic about it right out of the chute. She said, "You absolutely should run." And I said, "Well, that's really impressive. I'm glad you care about my career and the positions that I've taken, the importance to the Republic for me to run." And the longer we talked, the more it became clear that she just wanted me out of the house and away from her. She's probably burning the place down this morning. But the 20-year-old said to me, "You know, Dad, if you run and tell the truth and you lose, no one can fault you for it." And I said to her that there was no other reason for me to run, and that actually there was no other reason for me to win. And about a month or two ago, the Des Moines Register, which is the largest paper in Iowa, ran an editorial after they did their editorial board with me that said, on the headline, "Michael Bennet pounds truth into this campaign." And I was able to send that to Caroline and say, well, I may not be winning yet, but at least I'm doing what we agreed I should be doing. And I think that's really important for all of us at this moment when our democracy is under siege. Donald Trump, I believe, is much more a symptom of our problems than he is the essential cause of our problems, although he's made matters much worse. And starting with an understanding of where we need to be as a country and we need to go, I think, is important if we're going to have the chance to win this election. Jim mentioned a little bit of what I had done outside of politics. I spent time in the private sector. It's funny you mentioned the movie theaters because we did create the largest movie chain in the world at the time, and it also spawned another business, which was 20 minutes of digital advertising at the beginning of the movies, which my kids have still not forgiven me for when they have to sit through it, although I will say it was a lot better than when they just had a slide from the local muffler shop or the trivia. You know, now you can actually watch Coca-Cola being poured. They are completely unconvinced. But since that time, I had the chance to run a very large urban school district, 95,000 kids, $1 billion budget. That's a large budget. It's 3 times the size of some other places, like, let's say, South Bend, Indiana is one example. And so, just to pick one place on the map. But I've also run 2 Senate races now in a purple state, the purple state of Colorado. It's a tough state to win once. It's a tough state to win twice. And I'm the only candidate in the race who's actually won 2 races in a state like that. That's going to be critically important for us as we think about not just winning the presidency in 2020, but also winning a majority back in the United States Senate. That's going to require us to win places like Colorado and Maine and Arizona and North Carolina. These are tough places to win. And we got to win. I mean, we got to win. Just this week, Donald Trump disgraced the United States again. He said that foreign policy is what I'll be remembered for. I think he's got that right. I guarantee you the Kurds will never forget. Not the soldiers who fought beside us to destroy ISIS only to be abandoned because Trump was afraid to take a stand against Erdogan. Erdogan got all the territory that he wanted. We need to stand up to tyrants here and abroad. That's what it is to be America. And to do that, we need to focus on the enormous challenges that led to Donald Trump's election in the first place. 9 million people voted twice for Barack Obama and once for Donald Trump. 9 million people were so fed up with our broken politics and a bunch of politicians in Washington so unresponsive to the challenges they were facing every day that in the end they voted for a reality TV star to lead us in Washington. And I don't think we're going to trick those people into voting for us with free stuff, unfunded programs, or empty promises. I just don't think we're going to do it. You might be able to win a Democratic primary that way, maybe. but you're not going to be able to win a general election that way. Instead, I think we need to tell the truth. We need to heal our divisions, and we need to drive, as Jim said, drive economic opportunity for everybody in America. And just as I do in Colorado, and just as Jeannie Shaheen does here and Maggie Hassan does here, we need to say the same thing in the primary that we say in the general election. I know those guys, and I know that the day they're running for the general election. And they know what they're saying in the primary is going to affect whether they're going to be able to win at the end. That's what we have to do today, and I'm worried about our discipline in doing that. When it comes time to vote, you know it's important to nominate somebody who's got a vision that can actually inspire a broad coalition to beat Donald Trump. And here's what that vision looks like to me. An economy that works for everybody, not just the top 10%, and instead, through my tax plan, cuts childhood poverty by 40% in less than 2 years. A public option that finishes Obamacare, so we can cover everybody in this country in 3 years and cut costs, including prescription drugs. That's not Medicare for all, which other candidates have proposed without admitting the only way to do it is to raise middle-class taxes massively in this country. 39 of the 40 Democrats who won seats last year in 2018, including right here in New Hampshire, and flipped the House of Representatives, supported a public option, not Medicare for all. And most of those people beat people in the primaries who were supporting Medicare for all. As the only school superintendent who's ever run for president, I can tell you how important education is to driving opportunity and how important it is to our future. And when one set of kids has access to preschool and another set, through no fault of their own, does not, equal is not equal. And when one set of kids has access to high-quality K-12 schools because of where their parents live and the other, through no fault of their own, does not, equal is not equal. And when one group of kids has access to guidance counselors, and to parents who went to college, and to summer jobs to put on their resume, and to people to help them fill out their college applications, and the other does not, equal is not equal. And that's why today in America, our education system's actually reinforcing the brutal income inequality we have rather than liberating people from it. And as long as that's true, the promise of America, the land of opportunity, is foreclosed to almost anybody who's born poor in this country, like the kids in my old school district, most of whom live in poverty and most of whose parents, most of whom are kids of color. So I can tell you from my perspective, and more importantly, from their perspective, instead of pandering on free college, what we should be offering in this country is free preschool for every kid who needs it. And that's every kid in America. And we should be telling the kids that are graduating from high school but not going to college, which is 70% of our kids, that you can earn a living wage when you graduate from high school, not just the minimum wage. I was in Manchester months ago meeting with students at a vocational education program here, and there was a young woman working on a hovercraft there, which was the class project. They were building an airplane next year. And we got to talking, and she's graduating this year, and I asked her, I said, what are you doing after you graduate? And she had this huge smile on her face. And she said, I'm becoming an underwater welder. And I said, I'll bet that pays well. And she smiled and she said, yes, it does. And by the way, speaking of all that, we got to pay our teachers like the professionals that they are. We're running a system of public education that was designed when we had a labor market that discriminated against women and said, you've got two professional choices, one's being a teacher and one's being a nurse. So come teach Julius Caesar every year in the Manchester schools, and we'll pay you a ridiculously low salary that no one else in your college class will ever accept. But if you stick with us for 30 years, we'll give you a pension that you know we're not now funding. That made sense in a labor market where we were discriminating against people. We're not doing that the same way anymore, and we've got to find a way to update that for the 21st century. That's not going to be easy to do. We need a climate policy that doesn't allow the other side just to rip it out in 2 years. You can't solve climate 2 years at a time. We have to create a durable solution on climate. I hope somebody will ask about that, and we'll talk about it in the Q&A. Comprehensive immigration reform that reflects the bill I wrote in 2013 as part of the Gang of Eight, with a pathway to citizenship, protection for dreamers, and 21st century border security. A return to government of, by, and for the people. We've got to end partisan gerrymandering in this country, and I have the bill to do it. We got to ban members of Congress from becoming lobbyists, and I have the bill to do it. We need to make sure every single American in every single election is able to cast their vote, and I've got the bills to do that. And if I'm elected president, I will go across this country to every single state and lead an effort in every one of those states to overturn Citizens United, to get the money out of our politics and put people back in. It's not more complicated than that. That's an agenda that will win blue states and purple states. That's an agenda that will bring back those 9 million voters that voted twice for Barack Obama and once for Donald Trump. That's how we've won those hard races in Colorado, bringing together Democrats and independents and even some Trump voters. That's how Jeannie has won. That's how Maggie has won. And that's how I think we're going to win this election. I don't believe it is any more complicated than that. If you remember just one thing from what I said this morning, remember how you do it in New Hampshire, because that's the way it'll work in the rest of the country. And that's how we're going to drive opportunity, preserve our democracy, and secure our children's future and America's role in the world. And I'm going to need your help to continue in this race, and I'm going to try to do it because I think it's very important that we have somebody who's thinking about the general election, not just the primary. Thank you very much for being here today, and with that, I'm happy to take any questions, any criticisms anybody has. As I said, I was a former school superintendent. There is no way for you to hurt my feelings. They're all been beaten out of me a long time ago.
We have students who have the mics, and if you just wait until they come. But if I could just ask a question or two. You mentioned about the tax cut for middle-class families that would reduce child poverty by 40%. Yeah. I think it's called the American Family Act that you co-sponsored or sponsored with Sherrod Brown of Ohio. Can you talk a little bit more?
Yes.
How?
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, we start with the softball.
No, I appreciate it. So look, it's called the American Family Act. It dramatically increases the child tax credit in this country, and it makes it payable on a monthly basis instead of on an annual basis, so families can actually, have the money to be able to spend on child care, on higher ed, on housing, or on food. I mean, if I had to summarize the last 10 years of town halls in my state, and in New Hampshire for that matter, in Iowa, it's people coming and saying, Michael, we are killing ourselves, but we can't afford some combination of housing, health care, higher education, early childhood education. This is a way of trying to deal with that. For people that aren't coming to my town halls because they're working 2 and 3 jobs just to get their kids out of poverty, and are the people that I used to work for in the Denver Public Schools, what they would say is, Michael, we're killing ourselves. No matter what we do, we can't get our kids out of poverty. You take the American Family Act, combine it with a big increase in the Earned Income Tax Credit, combine it with paid family leave, combine that with an increase in the minimum wage, and all of a sudden you're actually starting to grow the economy from the bottom down. Medicare for all is of no interest to the kids and the families that I used to work for in the Denver Public Schools. That's not their priority. Their priority is, how do we drive an economy that actually works for everybody, so it's not just about the top 10%. By the way, Columbia University is who studied it and said, I said 2 years. The truth is, in a year, you could reduce childhood poverty by 40% and $2 a day poverty for children living in America. Do it without adding a single bureaucrat to the federal government, and for 3% of the cost of Medicare for all. That's what Democrats should be standing for in this election, it seems to me.
You also said if we don't deal with climate change, it will destroy our economy. Can you just expand on that?
Thank you. So this is one that's particularly irritating to me. There is a climate denier in the White House. The reason there is a climate denier in the White House is that We lost the economic argument to Trump last time. He said that if we dealt with climate, we'd destroy the economy. If we ignore climate, that our economy would thrive. The opposite is obviously true. If we don't contend with climate, our economy will be destroyed and the globe in the end is going to be destroyed. That's an argument we can't lose. We're not going to win that argument with policies that are invented in some test tube in Washington, D.C. by politicians. We're going to do it by proposing strategies like the one I proposed in this campaign that would engage farmers and ranchers all across this country to sequester carbon in their soil, to pay them to do it, to create a coalition of Americans to close over a broken Washington. I want to dwell on this just for a minute. If you care about climate change, and I would say if you care about the country and you care about our children, which everybody in this room does, it's not enough to beat Trump. We have to fix the broken politics in Washington, D.C. We have to fix it. McConnell doesn't have to fix it. The Freedom Caucus doesn't have to fix it. They're fine breaking it because all they want to do is either nothing, immobilize our exercise in self-government, or put judges on the courts, or occasionally cut taxes for rich people. That's what they do. But if you want to solve climate change, you can't accept the world, as I said in my opening remarks, where we put in our proposals and they last for 2 years, the other side rips it out. We put it in for 2 years, they rip it out. 4 years, they rip it out. And you'll hear people on the campaign trail over and over again say, we need to act urgently on climate. And I agree with that and I believe it. And if I didn't, my daughters wouldn't let me come home. But it's not enough. We also have to have a solution that will endure for a generation. And because you can't fix climate 2 years at a time. And the only way you're going to do that is by building a broad coalition of Americans to overcome Washington, D.C. Changing the rules in Washington is not enough to do it. We need a politics that's actually more robust than what we've accepted today. And that's why I think it would be a big mistake for us to go down the road of thinking that we can just sort of substitute our version of one-party rule for their less preferred version of one-party rule. That might be interesting to us, on the cable television at night, but it's going to be of no interest to our children who are actually waiting for us to solve these problems.
You were one of the members of the Gang of Eight that worked on the immigration reform, and I think you got, 67, 68 votes. Will we ever get back to the days where we can work together on both sides? It seems like every major piece of legislation that's passed today, whether it's starting with the aid, the health care, the ACA, it's all one party.
Yep.
Will we ever get back to where we're going to have both sides working on a meaningful legislation?
That, I think, is what we have to do. We got to find a way to do it. We're treating our current political reality as if it's a permanent state of things, And there were writers who described, when the Roman Empire was collapsing, and they said the parties had lost such confidence in themselves, not even in each other, but in themselves, that they couldn't find a way to work on anything, and it became a permanent state of things. That's what I'm really worried about in our political system. In the 10 years I've been in the Senate, there are other examples, but there's no example as good as the Gang of Eight bill on immigration. If you remember that old Saturday morning cartoon about how a bill becomes a law, Schoolhouse Rock, there's a reason it's set up that way. It's supposed to work that way because when the founders set up this country, they didn't set it up thinking we would agree with each other. That wasn't their view. They thought we would disagree with each other. That in a republic there was no king or tyrant to tell you what to think. But what they believed as Enlightenment thinkers was that out of those disagreements, we would fashion more durable and more imaginative solutions than any one person could come up with on their own. And think about your own life. I'll say my life. The worst decisions I make are the ones I make by myself at home. The best decisions I make are ones where I contend with other people's points of view, where I have the benefit of other people's experiences and perspectives. That's how it's supposed to work. And that's why the legislature is set up there. If it was all about just one person's opinion or one party's opinion, there wouldn't be a need for a legislature. You could just have a governor or a president or a king. That's not how it's set up. And we've lost the ability at the national level today to do what you guys do on an annual basis when you come together and say, what's the budget for the town going to be? What's it going to look like this year on the capital budget? That's the same system. And it's what we have to get back to. And when you go through a process like the Gang of Eight process where, you know, you spend 7 months negotiating behind closed doors, Democrats and Republicans working in good faith on some of the toughest issues that we have as a country. Then you give it to the Judiciary Committee. They had something like 150 amendments they considered. They adopted more Republican amendments than Democratic amendments. Then it went to the floor. We legislated on the floor. We've had something like 18 amendments this year in the Senate, and I think we've passed 4 of them. We had more amendments than that on the Gang of Eight bill. That's how broken your national legislature is. And I think it's not just it's nice or, you know, I want to go back to the old days. That's not my point. My point is, in our system of government, there is no other way to create a durable result. And it is true that this has not been an equal opportunity sabotage of our government. That is absolutely true. The Freedom Caucus that came in 10 years ago, deliberately attempting to immobilize our exercise in self-government, to sabotage it, to destroy it. But the thing is, they were effective. And the last 6 years of the Obama administration, we were able to basically enact no legislation. If we accept that as a permanent state of things, we might as well accept that democracy can't solve climate change, that democracy can't do something meaningful to educate our kids or change the tax code so we're driving a different result for our kids. And I dwell on this because there are people running for president on the Democratic side who don't share that view, who think that more of the same is going to somehow lead to something better, and I completely disagree with that theory of the case.
A couple of your colleagues in the United States Senate who are running for president believe we ought to abolish the filibuster. Your thoughts on that?
Well, 2 things. One, I would say we have made, because of what politicians in Washington thought was an expeditious idea, we have turned in the last 20 years the constitutional responsibility to advise and consent on judicial nominees. We've made that into a mockery of what it used to be. We've made it into a completely partisan process. And I predicted, and I was right about this, that people would start to audition to become judges, you know, by saying, I'm the most right-wing judge on, you know, pro-choice or on choice, or I'm the most liberal person on. What I never would have imagined is we'd be putting judges on the courts who will not say whether they believe Brown versus Board of Education is settled law. That is what we are doing today, because politicians in Washington thought their disagreement was more important than the American people's confidence in the independence of the judiciary. So to my knowledge, I'm the only person in the Senate who's actually gone to the floor to apologize for my role in changing those rules when I voted to change those rules. So first I'd say you better be careful of unintended consequences. McConnell was the one who went to the floor and said, you're going to regret this sooner than you think. He was right about that, and he was much more strategic about this than the Democratic caucus was. I hate to say that, but it's true. And second, why don't we debate what we're going to do with the filibuster when Mitch McConnell's no longer in charge? Because there's only one person in America who can decide whether we have the filibuster or not, and that's Mitch McConnell. And I would say as long as he's the majority leader, I'd rather not have it be 51 votes that decides whether we're going to privatize Social Security or end Medicare or strip women of their reproductive rights.
Just a final question. You seem to be very firm on saying that a Democratic candidate who's running on Medicare for all, Green New Deal, maybe free college or free debt, forgiveness of debt, is going to have a very hard time winning in November. Very hard.
I believe it. I think, look, you can have the point of view that Donald Trump has wounded himself so badly that any one of us could beat him. But I wouldn't take that risk. I don't think we should take that risk. You know, we lost to him once. We should never have lost to him to begin with. He's a reality TV star. He had no relevant experience to be president. And everybody here knows the list of things that he did that that should have disqualified him from being president of the United States. There's no guarantee that he can't win this race again. So I do think it's important for us to nominate somebody who's thinking about how to win, not just on the, the coast, but in the rest of the country. Or in New Hampshire, for that matter, as I said earlier.
Right. Okay. Pat McDermott, AARP, the mic.
Morning, Senator.
Morning.
Pat McDermott, volunteer with AARP. I'll be brief. You mentioned in your remarks health care and prescription drugs. If you're elected president, what's the first thing you would do to lower the high prices of prescription drugs?
The first thing I would do is everything I could do by executive order to give the government the opportunity to negotiate prices. But I think that we've got to probably, in the end, pass legislation to do it. Donald Trump ran for office saying he would do it. He's done nothing to do it. All over America, seniors are having to make decisions about buying food or buying their prescription drugs, and I believe there is a broad consensus that this is a problem we now have to overcome. So that's what I would do to reduce prices.
Joe Murray in the back from Fidelity. We'll wait just for the mic. Right there.
You got one back.
And then, here's the mic here, Joe. Right here.
Oh, thanks. Come on over. Thanks for being here, Senator. It's a simple question, but I don't think the answer is simple. How does someone who many people might see as not being on the fringe of public opinion find their way closer to the center of the televised debate stage?
It's been a real challenge. I mean, obviously, it's self-interested in me to say this. I think the DNC rules have been deeply unfortunate because what they've incentivized is the same stuff that's been incentivized by the cable and by the social media, which is kind of a whole different primary than we used to have. It's nationalized the primary prematurely. Instead of having people come here and do the work that they're supposed to do, or Iowa and do the same work they're supposed to do, there's now sort of a national criteria for whether or not you can get to the center of the debate stage. So we're going to have to figure out how to do it, because the obvious ways of, of supporting pieces of legislation, I mean, there's a leading candidate in this race. My estimate is that of the stuff she's proposed how to pay for 15% of it. And you ask yourself, are these bold ideas, or is it responsible to have all these plans and only pay for 15% of it? Or should you be saying something different to the American people? And I don't want us to learn this the hard way, which is why I've stayed in the race, even though I haven't made it onto the debate stage and I'm not in the middle of the debate stage. But we're just going to have to figure out a way to communicate it with the American people and get there. It's not easy. And it's not ironic, but it is. I'm reminded again in this process that most people are not focused on the cable at night, and they're not focused on politics all day long. Most people are just trying to support their family, build their business, build their community, and what their expectation is of people like me is that we're doing our job like that Schoolhouse Rock video suggests our job ought to be done. It's not any more complicated than that. And I think to the extent that we've abandoned our ability to do that, or any pretense that we're going to do it that way, we've abandoned the American people in the process and their priorities and their interests, which is, at the end of the day, if it looks totally broken anyway, you might as well send a reality TV star there because you can't do any worse. I think we can do much better, which is why I'm running.
The young lady here in the back.
Good morning, Senator.
Hi.
My name is Maury Miletus, and I'm an advocate with the Alzheimer's Association. Personally, I want to thank you for signing on to the Approving Hope for Alzheimer's Act. If you were elected president, what would you do to continue to fund NIH to stay on track to find a cure by 2025? And as we know, there are 5.6 million Americans living with the disease. 200,000 of those are under the age of 60 that don't qualify for any of the benefits under the Older Americans Act. So again, if you are elected president or continue to stay in the Senate, what would you do to stay on a track to find a cure for Alzheimer's?
We have to invest to find a cure. We've talked about this before, so thank you for your advocacy. It's really important. because the cost will eat us alive if we don't find a cure. And I believe we can find a cure. The science is completely fascinating. So I would dramatically increase the investment in NIH, not just for Alzheimer's, but other basic research as well. We have cut our investments in our country, which includes NIH, by 35% since Ronald Reagan was president. All our investments in infrastructure, in education, in our national forests, whatever those things are, we've slashed it by 35%, while we've told ourselves our priorities are borrowing $5 trillion from the Chinese. We literally have done that, borrowing $5 trillion from the Chinese for the privilege of giving the wealthiest people in America tax cuts. Hard to imagine that's been our priority, but it's been our priority, and it's been Trump's priority. $5.6 trillion we borrowed from the Chinese to fight these 20-year wars in the Middle East. That's 11 or 12 or 13 trillion dollars we could have spent investing in Alzheimer's, curing Alzheimer's, fixing every road and bridge in America, giving every teacher a 50% raise, or giving every kid in America preschool, making Social Security solvent for my kids' generation, paying down some of our debt and deficit so the next generation isn't crushed by the lack of responsible choices that we've made. We could have done every single thing I just talked about for the money that we've spent on this other stuff, yet we did none of it. And from the vantage point of people struggling in this economy where wages haven't gone up for 50 years, where education is reinforcing the income inequality we have, and we've got pressures coming down on us like the growth in Alzheimer's, you'd have to ask yourself, what in the world have we been doing? Why has that been our set of priorities? It's staggering to me, and most people don't know it. I mean, if you were looking at this planet from another planet and you saw the record, our record of the last 20 or 30 years, you would ask yourself, do these people even care about their children? Do they even care about their children? On our planet, we care about the next generation. On our planet, we care about what our country's role in the world is going to be. What is wrong with these people?
Other questions? Well, I have two final questions then. One is...
Sorry, I didn't mean to depress everybody.
No.
Don't be depressed, because the answer is stop doing that and start investing in America again.
Okay, I've got Jim Flanagan from the college here at St. A's, and then I'll ask my questions.
Yeah, welcome again to Senator St. Anselm. Senator, I fortunately lost a member of my family in Iraq in December 2005, actually, and his godson, my son who's a junior in high school, is here today, actually. My question for you is, if you're elected president, what are you going to do in the Middle East, and in particular in this mess in Syria? So hopefully my son, doesn't have to, he would be the fifth generation in our family to volunteer. So just curious with that. And again, welcome to St. A's.
Thank you, and I'm very sorry for your loss. I remember one day I was sitting at my desk in the Senate, and not in my office in Washington, and the TV was on, and these TV commentators were saying, Trump will never win in South Carolina. The next day was the South Carolina primary. And they said he'll never win there because he's criticized George Bush and the war in Iraq. And I looked up at the TV and I just shook my head, and I thought, that's exactly the opposite of what's going to happen, because people in South Carolina know what the cost has been, and they've got a real question about the gains there. And what's incredible to me is, while Trump at first supported the Iraq War and then ran claiming that he didn't support the Iraq War, that he's completely learned the wrong lessons from all this stuff. You look at the Syria mission that he just unwound. It's the opposite of what we were doing before. We've been there for 5 years. We lost 6 American service people, which is tragic to have lost 6, but it was 6 people. The Kurds lost 10,000 people. And we were able basically to dismantle ISIS, at least for the moment. That sounds like a fairly successful engagement in the Middle East, yet that's the one he's chosen to end. And now, bizarrely, he's talking about protecting an oil rig in in southern Syria that isn't even part of the mandate that he has for our troops. They're not there to protect oil rigs. They were there to help the Kurds destroy ISIS. And that's what the authorization of the use of force says. So I would do the opposite of everything Donald Trump has done in the Middle East. He should never have torn up the Iran deal, that was not perfect, but it was a moment in our history when we were actually trying to manage a problem in the Middle East rather than go to war with it, and that's what he's done. I would restore our alliances with the people in Europe and in the region so that we're not acting alone on any of the circumstances when it comes to stuff in the Middle East, because we tend to make bad decisions when we're acting alone and make better decisions when we've persuaded other people. And I would do everything that I could to try to help build civil institutions that exist in that region that haven't been corrupted, that are universities or other opportunities for us to help rebuild the architecture of civil society. This is not going to be an easy thing to do, and it's going to take the rest of my life and the rest of your life to start moving things in the right direction, because things have been so off track for so long. I guess I'd add to this that we've got a big job to do to restore our alliances with Europe and push back against the threat from Russia, and to lead in our own hemisphere to deal with the immediate refugee crisis that's on our border, and begin to dig ourselves out from underneath the causes of those problems in the Northern Triangle countries. If we have an America that has led the way we historically have led, I think we can make progress in all those regions and on all those issues. If you have an America that's going to continue to retreat the way Donald Trump has retreated, I mean, I hesitate to say what it's going to look like 4 years from now, but we will not remotely have the role to play that we historically have, and we still are, as imperfect as we are, we're still, the world's longest lived democracy, and we're still a beacon to people all over this world, and they're waiting for us to lead. We have to lead.
Don't you think that the Congress abdicated their responsibility by giving the executive branch the complete authority to send troops all over the world?
I do.
We have the War Powers Act, but...
No, we should be voting on this. I mean, we're still, the AUMF I'm talking about that he's violating is, more than a decade old.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question, please. My name is Mary Roberge, and I'm also from AARP, New Hampshire. As you know, there are people in the country that rely on Medicare and Social Security to ensure a quality of life and also decent health care. There have been talks of cuts for Medicare, and we don't know about Social Security, how long it will last. What would you do to strengthen Medicare and Social Security?
There haven't just been talks about it. As you know, President Trump's budget, notwithstanding his promises during the campaign, have cut Medicare over and over again, the biggest cuts that have ever been made. Now, he hasn't been able to do it because Congress hasn't supported him, so that's good. On Social Security, I think we should lift the cap on the payroll tax and fund it. I think we should probably also be increasing Social Security payments for the most vulnerable Americans among us. You're right, by the way, if we didn't have these programs in place, the poverty rate among seniors would be twice as high as it is today. That's why these programs are so important. I might mention that our child poverty rate is twice the size of our seniors rate, which is why I'm so interested in the American Family Act that we talked about earlier. And then on Medicare, I think what we've got to do is change the way our healthcare system delivers medicine in America. We have got to realign our incentives and disincentives so we reduce the cost of healthcare. That doesn't mean cutting Medicare. It does mean reducing the cost of healthcare. We're spending twice as much as any other industrialized country in the world is spending on healthcare. And by the way, ask yourself whether you really think Bernie's plan is going to make that problem better or compound that problem. And we can't afford to do it. We're spending twice as much. And I think we can spend, if we were spending 2 or 3 percentage points less of our GDP on healthcare, I'd feel much better about where we are from a fiscal point of view, and our ability to then invest in the next generation and deal with that 35% cut would also be appreciably better than it is today.
Maybe I'll just ask the final question, and And would you support opening a formal impeachment inquiry into President Trump? Oh,
I do, no, I do support it. I'm glad the House has opened the inquiry, and this is an opportunity for us, once again, to try to heal our democracy and remind Americans why the rule of law is so important and that nobody, including the President, is above the rule of law.
did you have a question?
I do. Senator Bennet, welcome to St. Anselm College. My name's Sean Thompson. I'm a sophomore here. So kind of going off of the whole like impeachment process, how can members of both the House and the Senate continue like legislative progress on infrastructure, healthcare, taxes, foreign policy, while this is kind of just taking over every cable news outlet, social media? Like this seems to be the only thing that people like are talking about on the air.
Well, first of all, I would say we have an obligation to walk and chew gum at the same time. And we've got to do our job, whether it involves impeachment or involves all the things that you're talking about. But let me give you a more honest answer to that, which is for the 10 years that I've been in the Senate, we've barely been doing any of this stuff that you're talking about. We can't even pass a basic infrastructure bill in America anymore. You know, while we spend 7 or 8 months consumed with the stupidity of Trump's $6 billion for the wall that Mexico was supposed to pay for, China's building 3,500 miles of fiber optic cable to connect Latin America with Africa with China. While they're investing in infrastructure all over China and all over the world through the One Belt, One Road initiative, we can't even pass an infrastructure bill in America that's real. The last infrastructure bill we passed was a bill that sold reserves from our oil reserve at some ridiculously inflated amount of money, which is one-time money to fund, you know, ongoing infrastructure payments. So what I'm saying is, if we do not want to be the first generation of Americans to lead less opportunity, not more, to our kids and to our grandkids, we need to get our act together. And we need your involvement in this now. We can't wait, you know. And I know that we can do it. I'm optimistic. I really am optimistic that we can do it because Americans have always stepped up, even in worse times than this. You know, nobody in this room is being asked to end human slavery. Nobody in this room is being asked to make sure that women have the right to vote, that my daughters have the right to vote. Nobody's being asked to storm the beaches of Normandy. All we're being asked to do is rescue our democracy. But there isn't anybody else to do it but us. There is nobody else in a democratic republic to do it but us. And I don't mean the elected officials. I mean all of us. Everything that's obviously wrong with the way our broken political system is not delivering for the next generation of Americans. And I think that's how we should ask ourselves whether we're making progress or not. Everything that we're not doing is not because of politicians in Washington. It's because we're not fulfilling our role as citizens to say to these people we have an expectation of greater leadership than this. We're living in a world now where instead of doing the stuff that this young man is talking about, we got people mugging for the cameras, running into a secured briefing to make sure that the Congress can't do its job of investigating the president. And why are they there? Because they want the president to be able to see them on national television, so he'll call them up and say, you're doing a good job. We're living in a country where we have cut and run on our allies this week in a way that no other president in the history of the United States has done. None. And that's not the country that I was raised in. Those are not the values that I was raised by. And what I'm here to tell you is it's as bad as it looks. And the only people that can fix it is us. And I would say this, the time that I've spent in New Hampshire, the time that I've spent in Iowa, the time that I've spent in South Carolina reinforces my view that we are up to this and that we can satisfy the example that our parents and grandparents set for us. And we can leave a legacy that our kids and our grandkids are going to be proud of. But it starts with all of us right now. Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it.